Hello and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie. I'm the senior editor here, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Zeus Kerravala, founder and principal analyst at ZK Research. Zeus, it's great to have you with us. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Charlie. It's great to be back with you guys. It's always a pleasure to be on CX today.
And it's always a pleasure to have you. We always learn a lot, and I think we have a really interesting topic to talk about today, and it's one that's kind of been brewing for the last kind of year or so, and a lot of new entrants entering the CCaaS space, including Zoom, Google, Microsoft, and Cisco. Lots of the like. So I think kind of my first question to you on this topic would be kind of what is driving this trend?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because there's a lot of different ways to look at this. There's an obvious trend of UCaaS and CCaaS coming together, and so what you mentioned was historical UCaaS companies moving into CCaaS. And what's interesting is there really haven't been many CCaaS vendors move into UCaaS. Talkdesk announced kind of a light UC product, and I expect them to do that. But it makes you wonder why it's been so one way and not the other. Now, the overarching theme that's driving this is this focus on experience, right? So businesses are now competing on customer experience. Obviously the contact center has a big play in that, but but more and more you're seeing this kind of integration of front office, back office, and that's driving the need for UC and CC to come together. Now, the reason it's been so heavily dominated UC adding CC is because typically what I see in the buying cycle is UC buyers having strong influence over contact center, but not really the other way around, which is really interesting. And will that change down in the future? Maybe. As we go up market to larger organizations, but I think it's this focus on experience that's been driving it. The other kind of interesting trend is that contact center is used now by more than just contact center people, contact center agents. I talk to companies now where they're given historically, people like sales people, inside sales, field service, marketing folks, really anybody with the Salesforce.com seat, they're now adding contact center seats to it, and so it's an obvious add-on to it, and so because these people, they need to collaborate with one another, but they also need to deal with customers, and so bringing the two together, makes some obvious sense.
Yeah, I think that was a couple of really interesting points there. I think first of all, something that I hadn't noticed myself, but it's a very kind of clear trend now that you've said it, is kind of it's the UCaaS vendors entering the CCaaS space, not so much the other way around. I thought that was
Yeah.
fascinating, and also kind of your point of how kind of organizations are changing to kind of spread the contact center kind of across the organization. Actually, there was kind of one business I know that's kind of bringing in store
and
employees of kind of
And for the UCaaS vendors, there's a lot of upside too, because if you think about the average revenue per seat on the UC side, you're lucky to get maybe $30 per user per seat now, right? And you have to add all these features to keep the price fixed. If you look at the CCaaS side, the price per seat ranges anywhere from $50 per seat at the low end all the way to over $200 at the high end. A lot of the AI features that are being added, I think, are going to push that price up even higher, double, possibly triple that. And so from a revenue per user standpoint, contact center is very, very lucrative compared to UC.
Yeah, again, that's something that I hadn't
Yeah.
kind of thought about, and kind of the potential that brands kind of have by merging into the value that they can create for themselves is also kind of a key point, as you mentioned there. So lots of kind of fascinating points already. I think my next question to you would be kind of those brands that we've already mentioned, kind of moving into the CCaaS space of kind of Microsoft and Zoom, Cisco, and Google, which currently have the strongest CCaaS proposition.
Yeah, I think of those four, I'd say Cisco Webex has the most complete offering right now. Obviously they've got a huge UC install base with Webex, and they're able to leverage that. One of the things that I like about what Cisco did was I was a little worried that they would take the old BroadSoft code and try and retrofit it and make it CCaaS. That would have been their fast approach to it. They were obviously late to CCaaS, but they actually went back to the drawing board. They've rebuilt Webex, because of the pandemic, and then they used that cloud native backend with Webex to build their CCaaS. It's the same channels. They just took a bit longer a route by waiting for the rebuild on Webex to be done first instead of using Broadcom. But I think that was the right thing to do. they've also got a massive R&D organization, right? So whatever feature gaps they have, they can close. But it's a pretty complete offering now with a lot of AI capabilities. Perhaps the most interesting vendor in the space is Zoom, right? Zoom's got tremendous brand loyalty. People, they meet happy, phone happy, whatever. People tend to like Zoom. They've done a really good job with this land and expand strategy, adding phone, right? So they went from no seats in phone to like over 3 million, they said on their last quarter in roughly a couple of years, right? That is a tremendous uplift in phone licenses. Their contact center offering today is still pretty basic. They just bought that company Solvy that you guys wrote about on UC today, I think, to add conversational AI capabilities. But they do have some work to do to bring more and more digital channels into it. But they're taking, I think what you'll see from Zoom is they'll continue to use these small technology tuck-ins to add differentiated features, and then they'll close that gap with internal R&D with the core capabilities. But they really are new to it. They've just got into it this year. But I think they're because of the high brand loyalty they have, I think they're really a fascinating one to watch. Now, Microsoft and Google, they're both interesting for different ways. I'll start with Google. I was talking to the CIO about this just a couple of days ago, and he was asking me, is Google ever going to be serious about the enterprise? And, is Google, is their app suite, and, is this something that they're going to take seriously, or is this just a hobby within Google? And if you look at Google's overall revenue, even if they were to become a 10% contact center vendor, I don't know if it really moves the needle compared to search revenue. So, there's that expression that says, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. I think for about 5 years in a row, one of my predictions was always that Google would become a dominant player in the UC space, and it never really happened. And I think for the most part, UCaaS and CCaaS at Google remain somewhat of just a hobby almost with that company. And I'm waiting for them to really step up. I think, the partnership with UJet's interesting. I think if Google were to buy UJet, that would be more a signal that they're serious about this market, and that would be the time that I would think that Google could in fact become a dominant player in the market. But right now I'm on the side. I put them on the sidelines. And Teams is the last one. Teams is kind of an interesting company as well, because Microsoft's done such a good job of adding Teams licenses, although they've kind of backdoored their way to success, right? They added, anybody who's got an O365 license is Teams. By and large, the product quality from Teams isn't great. It's a really good chat product. It's an okay meetings product. The telephony is substandard, which is why so many UC partners have the Microsoft, Direct Connect type of offering where you can, Operator Connect, where you can add telephony features. And this is an area that I think Microsoft's approach of be good enough and throw it at the wall won't work. Contact center is very, very important to most companies. It's the first line of defense, right? In a lot of cases, as I talked about, customer experience is now the number one brand differentiator. I don't think you can throw a half-baked product to the wall and fix it on the fly like they've done with Teams. I think this is something they have to be all in or all out. And so, for that reason, I do think I put them a bit on the sidelines, and I'll wait for them to come up with a little bit more fully featured product. They're another one, though, with the resources they have. They could go buy Five9, they could go buy Talkdesk, they could go buy Genesys or Avaya if they wanted to, right? So if they really wanted the contact center, they could short circuit their way into it. But right now, it seems like with Google and Microsoft, it's a little bit of wait and see, where Webex and Zoom seem to be all in right now.
Yeah, I think there's lots of great stuff to unpack there. I think starting kind of with the WebEx solution, it does kind of seem that it is kind of a step ahead at this stage. It has won one of our CX awards actually earlier in this year, and kind of Zoom is very fascinating, as you say, and how quickly they're innovating kind of with their acquisition of Solvay and kind of also releasing their own AI products. But maybe kind of the digital channel offering has got, as you've said, has got maybe a little bit of catching up to do, and it will be interesting to see how Google and Microsoft fast forward almost into the future. Kind of, especially with Google, it seemed to go under the radar a little bit more than kind of the Zoom launch earlier this year, or maybe even end of 2021. So I think, it's going to be really interesting kind of keeping an eye on, see where these kind of head into the future. And kind of on that note of kind of evolving into the future, these kind of solutions at the moment are kind of a little way behind kind of the major players in the CCaaS industry currently, which are kind of the likes of Genesys and Talkdesk and NICE. how long do you think it will take the kind of 4 new entrants to kind of reach their level?
Well, I think from a feature standpoint, WebEx is really close right now. You could argue that they're there. Zoom has some work to go. I think by year end, you'll see Zoom have closed the feature gap. Anyways, now this is the chart. This is more than features, right? There's a lot of, especially when you deal with enterprises, there's a lot more to contact center than here. Go to our website, sign up for 10 licenses and turn it on. There's a lot of pro services work that has to do. There's application integration. There's customization for certain customers and things like that. And so, it's one thing to have the product, but then it's the other thing to have the contact center know-how, right? To be able to actually take share from these bigger companies, right? Because they've been doing contact center as a service now for years and years and years. And so that'll be the interesting part. I think WebEx is like I said, as a product, I think that's pretty much closed that gap. And I think go toe to toe with features. The question is, do they have the other things that surround it that can make them successful? As I mentioned, I think for Zoom, I think by year end we'll see them be a lot more full featured. And then with Google and Microsoft, who said we don't know, right? They could just go buy somebody to jump into it tomorrow. They certainly have the resources to do it. They have more resources. They could probably buy up almost the rest of the industry combined if they wanted to, right? So, it's a wait and see on them. But I do think it's contact center buyers tend to be very loyal to the brands that they have. I think the opportunity for the Zooms in WebEx, and even Microsoft and Google, is to leverage their UC install base, be able to backdoor their way in to users that perhaps don't have contact centers. So as I mentioned, there's a trend of giving salespeople and marketing people contact center seats. So if I were a Zoom or a WebEx, I would go to those companies that I have a big install base with, and I'd move my contact center into those adjacent areas first and look to coexist with those other brands, and then look to try and take it over from there. So.
Yeah, that's kind of a fascinating point. Actually, it'll be interesting to see kind of if they kind of follow that notion. But from what you're saying, yeah, it does seem like a logical kind of process to take for these brands. But maybe kind of taking a kind of bigger picture view now, I think it's kind of interesting to discuss how the entrance of these kind of 4 major brands will kind of shake up the CCaaS world. Are you seeing anything change at the moment?
Obviously their entrance has been pretty new. I actually think it's good for the industry. I think competition always drives innovation faster. And I think the contact center industry for a long time really stood still, and then it was the rise of the cloud, the cloud players like at Talkdesk and Five9 that actually helped drive more and more innovation into it. And I think we'll see another step up, especially with the integration of UC and CC coming together, right? So, 8x8 markets their XCaaS offering. Dialpad has gone to market with TrueCaaS, kind of the same kind of idea where you have the two together. And so it'll be, what I'm really interested to see is how the pure plays now react to that, right? Talkdesk has made their play. They're building their own UCaaS product. It's possible that Five9 could go out and buy a UC player or something like that and bring it in, right? They tried to merge with Zoom. Genesys certainly has the resources, so they could go do the same. So does NICE. And so we'll see how these vendors respond. But I do think we'll see some kind of shakeup going on here. We're likely to see some kind of consolidation. I think even when you look at some of the smaller like a Dialpad and a 8x8, I think those companies would be ripe for acquisition as well, because they do have a good UC stack. They do have CC. You can see one of the bigger CCaaS players perhaps bringing them into their fold. And right now, when you look at the markets, everything's deflated. And so if you do have the resources, frankly, it's a good opportunity to go through some consolidation work.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it would be very interesting to see if kind of the innovation cycle does kind of speed up as well.
Yeah.
The impact.
Well, and the other big change too is, right, most of these are all cloud native. Like you think of the first generation of CCaaS players, they were built on what was thought of as modern cloud back in 2010, right? And that that was really just a lift and shift of your old legacy stack, into the cloud. BroadSoft was a great example of that, right? Which Cisco had acquired. Now, now that most of these vendors have migrated to pure cloud native backends, microservices, container based, the innovation can be faster because now you're able to, especially if you buy other cloud native companies, you can integrate that in very, very quickly. And so the fact that we are living in this era of microservices and containers, I am expecting to see the innovation cycle speed up. The difficulty, though, is getting customers to consume these features at the rate at which they can innovate. I think Cisco talked about it just on the UC side. They added 2,000 features last year. That's a lot of features to get your customers to add into. Contact center is very process driven. If you drop 2,000 features on a contact center agent in a year, they would drown, right? So while I think the opportunity to drive innovations there, it's going to be fascinating to see how the vendors roll this out in a way that's consumable but also differentiated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's absolutely. It's very kind of, as you say, fascinating to see where this is all going to head. I mean, 2,000 features, as you say, on a contact center agent. Yeah. I couldn't even imagine, but it's always kind of opened up my mind. Yeah, sorry, Sam.
I said they'd quit. They did over being overwhelmed by new features. So now a lot of them will be behind the covers, right? So when you get into agent assist and things like that, or even virtual agents, those are something that the agent wouldn't really notice. But still, there's going to be, I think, the agent of 2 years from now is going to have a dramatically different product than the ones do today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be kind of very interesting for everybody kind of in the contact center to see where the next generation goes, is kind of all this automation and self-service, as well as making the job of agents much more difficult, and how kind of the agent experience will evolve with kind of the new CCaaS features and kind of support systems. And the UC is a great example of how support channels can be facilitated in the contact center to support agents and giving them access to subject matter experts. And I think there's lots of different ways, and I'm sure we could talk about all these innovations for much longer, but it's been really great to talk to you today, Zeus. It always kind of opens up my mind. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Charlie. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. And thank you everybody for watching today. Bye for now.